Class is now in session. I'm Professor Hockey, and today we'll be discussing Game 20 of the regular season for the San Jose Sharks as they took on the Detroit Red Wings and won by a score of 5-4 in overtime. We have talked multiple times about the lack of full 60-minute efforts that we have seen from the Sharks this season. Even in their victories, like against the Devils or the Kings, there have been large portions of the game in which they have gotten severely outplayed. Now, that is not necessarily to say that for a full 60-minute effort to actually occur, you have to be the better team for every second of every period that you have. That would be simply impossible. Even the best of the best teams are not actually able to pull that off. But the idea here is that if you do have a bad shift or a couple of bad shifts and the other team does get maybe a chance on net, that you're able to pull the momentum back on your side, keep it with yourselves, play with more pace so that the other team only gets a few limited chances here or there and nothing fully consistent. That's what it means to play a 60-minute game, and that's what we really haven't seen from the San Jose Sharks this season. Until tonight. It might not appear this way on the scoreboard. A 5-4 game is, it's a lot of goals to give up, and it's one that actually goes into the post-regulation play. So you're thinking, oh, it must have been really, really close, teams going either way. But honestly, I thought the Sharks looked really good for the majority of the night. There were moments here in which the Sharks did make crucial errors that led to some Red Wings goals. There were penalties that the Sharks definitely should not have taken, and there were small portions of time in this game in which they did struggle. For instance, right at the beginning of the second period, the first 3 or 4 minutes, the Red Wings got shift after shift in the offensive zone. But as a whole, I do think that the Sharks played very well for most of this game, and I would take it as an achievement here as their first 60-minute effort of the season. It's not perfect, and it rarely is ever going to be this season with a team that is likely to finish near the bottom of the standings, but we take what we can get here. It starts off in the first period. It is actually the Red Wings who strike first. Even though the Sharks get the first 6 or 7 shots of this game, it is Dylan Larkin who makes it 1-0. The Sharks respond with a goal from Eklund on the power play to tie it up at 1, but then it is the Red Wings on their power play of their own from Marcus Kasper who brings the lead back for the Red Wings, and it is a 2-1 game for Detroit. In the second period, like I said, the Sharks come out very, very slow to start that middle frame, but they actually score the first goal of it from William Eklund. A bit of a lucky one for him, his second of the game, and it is 2-2. But then the Red Wings, what goes around comes around essentially as they get their own lucky bounce here to take the lead back. But in the dying seconds of the second period, the last minute of it, it is Tyler Toffoli with another goal, his 9th of the season, and it is 3-3 going into the third. In that third period, this was definitely the best period of the night for the Sharks. The first and second were quite good for them, but the third was a step above, and it is Luke Kunin who gets the go-ahead goal and seems to put this one away for the Sharks until they actually get a power play for themselves in the last few minutes of the third period. And you might be thinking, why is this a bad thing? Well, what I have noticed as a tendency here for officials is that when they call a power play for a team that is already leading in the third period, once that power play expires and there's still like a few minutes left on the clock, it is almost a guarantee that that team that was leading will get called for a penalty of their own. And it was indeed the case here tonight. After this power play does expire and the Sharks don't manage to score, it is Ty Dellandrea who gets called for a tripping penalty. And now this is not to say that it is rigged or anything like that, but I can say that the referees are definitely a lot more strict in that type of situation. So the Sharks head to the box, and while the Red Wings were not very great at even strength in this game, they were very effective on the power play as they have been this season. So DeBrincat, with also a bit of a lucky one, ties this game up at 4. In the overtime, while the Red Wings would get the first glorious chance for themselves from Lucas Raymond with a beautiful move, it is actually Macklin Celebrini with his first career overtime goal on a nice move of his own who takes the win for the Sharks 5-4. Moving on to the players to talk about, we have the same exact forward line as we did previously. It's starting to get a little bit of stability here after much movement over the first month or so of the season. The top line remains the Lund line, Eklund, Granlund, and Zetterlund, continuing to not necessarily be fully dominant for full 60 minutes of the game, but they are usually good for at least a good 5-6 really strong shifts. We start off with William Eklund here, of course, couple of goals. Very, very nice to see from himself. That first one on the power play is what I talked about in my previous review, in the sense that Eklund is not someone who has developed in a way that has him shy away from the more dirty areas of the ice, but instead the exact opposite, where he's willing to go there. And we see Eklund, he crashes the net in this situation to pick up this rebound that was sitting there for him to get that first goal. And while the second one I mentioned was a bit of a lucky one, it's one Cam Talbot, the Red Wings goaltender, would definitely want back. It is still a goal nonetheless, and you can see how much confidence that really gave to William Eklund. I was actually surprised that he didn't actually end up with a hat trick by the end of just this second period, because he had multiple golden opportunities there because he was playing with so much extra jump. Eklund has been one of the Sharks' best players over these last few games, and it's quite nice to see. When it comes to the two other players, I actually really enjoyed Fabian Zetterlund's game as well here tonight. I thought he played with a lot of finesse. Usually, even though the Lund line has always looked very, very good, the weak link has always kind of been Fabian Zetterlund, just because Granlund and Eklund seem to have a very high level of skill, and Zetterlund's more of the kind of hard-working guy who maybe doesn't have that same level of puck handling ability. But I did like the way he raised his level of play here tonight. I thought he was very, very competitive with the two other line mates, and he continues to help complement this line. As I've mentioned in the past, Zetterlund being with these two players, he knows what his role is, and he fulfills it very, very well. And then when it comes to Mikael Granlund, we saw him make a very nice move on the overtime game winner. Granlund pretty rarely finds himself with Macklin Celebrini. It hasn't not happened much at all thus far this season, but it is a duo that the Sharks decide to go for in the overtime, and it works out. Granlund manages to not only make this play, but even stay onside doing it to set up that Celebrini game winner. But it was not simply just that. Obviously, Granlund is still a big part of the Lund line as a whole, and he's been playing some pretty good hockey. Maybe not quite hitting the peaks as when the Sharks were pretty much wholly relying on him in that middle part of the season just to break out of that original 9-game losing streak for the San Jose Sharks, but it is still quite good. When it comes to the Sharks' second line, we have Celebrini and Will Smith once again paired with Barclay Goodrow. Indeed, that is the downside here of finding more stability in the lineup, that stability does include this Barclay Goodrow player here on the second line with Celebrini and Smith. And the thing is that we were back at home for tonight's game, and so it would have been very trivial to call somebody up if the Sharks really wanted to do that, whether that be Gushin, whether that be Graf, whether that be Bordeleau. The Sharks could have gone that direction, and while that player would have obviously not been placed on the second line with Smith and Celebrini, I think Warsofsky would have a heart attack in that case. It was definitely a possibility for the Sharks to call someone up like that, have Toffoli, let's say, move up to the second line, and then have that call up like Gushin play on the third line with Dellandrea and Wenberg. That would be a perfectly fine move for the Sharks to do, but instead, they don't take that route, and now that they're heading back on the road, it seems as though Goodrow's going to remain on the second line at least for the next couple of games at a minimum. Having said that, while there is definitely bad news here where it was quite clear that Goodrow is still miles and miles behind when it comes to Will Smith and Celebrini's offensive capabilities. Usually when you have these types of young players, you'd like to pair them with guys who actually have some offensive prowess, and Barclay Goodrow is the antithesis of offensive prowess. But the good news, at the very least, is that he was not nearly as disastrous for this line as he was in the previous game against the Pittsburgh Penguins. He wasn't bringing a ton to it, but I also don't think he was detracting so much from it either. This was mostly because Smith and Celebrini seemed to just be kind of passing between each other a lot. They seemed to be able to find each other on the ice quite frequently, and so Goodrow was more just kind of support for those two players. But still, I don't think it was the worst of the worst game, even if it's still not a very good solution at all. When it comes to Celebrini and Smith, we'll start off with Macklin Celebrini. I actually thought he struggled a little bit out the gate here. The first half or so of this game, he wasn't necessarily playing that great, but then as it went on, he got better, and honestly, he definitely deserved to have a goal by the end of this game. The overtime winner was very, very nice, but he had tons of great chances in the later parts of the second, as well as the majority of the third period. He was getting so many shots on net, many of them from rather dangerous areas, and somehow they were just not managing to beat Talbot. So even though this one wasn't the strongest goal, it's one that Talbot probably would also want back, this overtime game winner. It kind of felt like a bit of positive hockey karma for Celebrini to be able to get that. But again, he is still playing some very, very good hockey, even if there was indeed the bit of a slow start for him. When it comes to the other line mate here, we do have Will Smith. I already talked about how Will Smith has looked night and day compared to his first few games in the NHL this season. Last game against the Pittsburgh Penguins was one of his best. Here tonight, it is very much the same thing. Will Smith looks significantly more comfortable. He's managing to have this fantastic chemistry with Macklin Celebrini. These two players seem to not only be very close on the ice, but also off the ice as well, which I imagine is the reason why it translates so effectively. Will Smith, there were mistakes for sure. For instance, in the last minute and a half of this third period, he had a couple of very weak plays in the defensive zone that definitely, I imagine, got Warsofsky a little bit nervous. But I'd say all in all, I was very impressed with Will Smith's performance here tonight, and he continues to just improve as each game passes. I think at this point, while I won't fully counted out, it seems as though we are past the development days here for Will Smith. Maybe he'll miss a game or two, for instance, on this upcoming road trip back-to-back. It's possible, but I would highly doubt it, especially with Nico Sturm. We may very well see Smith just play the rest of this season. When it comes to the Sharks' third line, we have Dellandrea, Wenberg, and Toffoli. This was a line that I was very much a fan of in the previous game against the Pittsburgh Penguins. Not so much here tonight. Now, that's not to say that they were bad. I thought, considering this was a consistent 60-minute effort for the San Jose Sharks, they were a part of that. They played an okay game, but they were definitely the weakest of the four lines for the Sharks. They just didn't really get a lot of offensive play, I would say, in the offensive zone at the very least. Tyler Toffoli, kind of a very classic Tyler Toffoli game in the sense that you don't really notice him all that much here on the ice in this game, and yet he actually does end up with a goal, his 9th of the season, which is very, very impressive, at least just from a stat sheet point of view. But like I said, it's not as though this was a great game for him. Ty Dellandrea, after a really impressive one in the previous game against the Pittsburgh Penguins, I thought was all right here tonight. And then Wenberg, very much of the same. So this was just kind of a relatively boring line, I said. I would say, for this game. They had a few mistakes. They had a couple of okay plays as well, but not really much to talk about here. But then we do get to the Sharks' fourth line, where there is actually a lot to talk about. With Nico Sturm going on IR and, of course, Yaroslav Askarov being called up, it seems as though Kostin will earn at least another couple of games here in the lineup. And that was the case here tonight as he joins Luke Kunin and Carl Grundstrom on this fourth line that once again was one of the more consistent lines for the San Jose Sharks here tonight. When Warsofsky was sending over the fourth line, you knew that they would be able to have a positive impact on the ice. And that is so great to see. And it actually does beg the question that if Kostin does keep up this performance, what ends up happening when Sturm is healthy once again? Who would actually step out of the lineup? Because this was a great game, probably Kostin's best game of the season, if I had to say so. I mean, it's not saying a ton because Kostin has been incredibly bad at times this year, but considering last game was pretty good, this game was even a step above that. He was actually keeping things simple, at least at the start of this game, using his body, separating players from the puck, and just generally being a positive force on the ice for the Sharks. There is still the tendency for Kostin to try and get a little bit too cute at times. It feels as though he builds up a bit too much confidence once he starts getting more consistent ice time in a game, and as such he starts to go for a little too many of these kind of cutesy type of plays. You don't want to see that happen as much, especially if he is just going to remain this fourth liner. But when he was actually committing to those fourth line fundamentals, he was doing a very, very good job at that. But he was not actually the MVP of this fourth line. That has to go to Carl Grundstrom, and I tweeted this out during the game, that he has been, Carl Grundstrom, one of the most consistent players on the San Jose Sharks over these last couple of weeks, which is kind of weird to say because he was healthy scratched on one of those games in the road trip, I think the game against the Philadelphia Flyers, so it would be weird to say that about a player like that, and yet it is indeed the case. While Grundstrom has basically very rarely even hit double-digit minutes of a game thus far this season, he's only done it one time in these last 5 games, just barely eclipsing 10 minutes a few games ago against the New York Rangers. In the minutes that he does play, whether that's 5, 6 to 8 minutes like tonight, He is giving the Sharks very, very effective shifts. And not only that, he is throwing the body around, he's being physical, but he's also rather skilled. And you saw that shine on this Luke Kunin goal that appeared like it was going to end up being the game winner. It was a beautiful play on the entry to feed Luke Kunin for this great opportunity. This is a type of pass that you would expect to see from like a Mikael Granlund or Macklin Celebrini, and that you would not expect to see from number 91 Carl Grundstrom, and yet he manages to pull it off. He has been very, very good for San Jose in this role over these last few weeks. And then when it comes to Luke Kunin, Kunin has been very invisible, I feel, over the last few weeks. Honestly, you have rarely noticed him all that much, and if you have, it's usually for bad play. Here tonight was a nice change of pace from that. He was not necessarily the weak link of this fourth line. He definitely did his part here tonight. He was a great player in this role. He manages to get the goal, which was quite nice to see. Nice to see him get rewarded for those first two periods, which were very impressive. And so a great night again for the Sharks' fourth line. Then we get to the defensive side of things, where we have the top pairing of Ceci and Jake Wallman. So after the Sharks have gone these last few games with Ceci and Thrun paired together, they do end up separating those two players, have Wallman come back up, and I can't necessarily blame Warsofsky for this. Not only was Wallman very, very good in the previous game against the Pittsburgh Penguins, but he's also going against his former team, and we have seen many times in the past this season players on the Sharks go up against their former team and have very good performances, like with Dellandrea and Blackwood, and especially with the sort of circumstances in which Wallman was moved away from Detroit, you might think that he would have a little bit of extra fire in him to play very well. Now, the thing here about Wallman is that there were a lot of highs in this game for sure. He made some very nice plays, especially over the first few minutes of this game. I thought he looked really, really good, carrying over that performance from the other night against Pittsburgh. But there were also some major, major mistakes, in particular on the two first period goals for the Red Wings. We see him have a Mario Ferraro-esque giveaway here on this first goal, as he just sort of wildly fires this one out of the zone, or at least tries to get it out of the zone, but it's kept in, and then it is a defensive zone breakdown. The Sharks not able to react quick enough to this keep-in, and it allows Larkin to be all alone in front for this goal. But then we also see on the Sharks penalty kill, where it seems as though Wallman finds himself incredibly out of position. Maybe it's Jan Ruda's fault, but I feel as though it is more so Jake Wallman who kind of hovers towards the strong side for the Sharks, leaving Marcus Kasper all alone, or Marco Kasper all alone on that side, on the weak side, to easily be able to have a ton of time to take the shot and beat Mackenzie Blackwood. So some egregious mistakes for Wallman, and then there were a few other sort of very, very close calls I felt through the rest of this game. So there were some good moments for Wallman for sure. It is far from a bad game, but there was a lot to clean up here as well. When it comes to his defensive partner, Cody Ceci, I mean, I have talked about how weird Cody Ceci has been at times this season, and no better way to really show that off is by a play that he made in the second period of this game, where the Ceci has the puck, the Sharks are going off for a line change, and instead of just playing this to the other side of the bench, weaker side there, nobody there, not going to really translate into anything, he decides to play it up the bench where all of the players are changing, so it ends up just being an easy pickup for the Red Wings, and then they go the other way 4-on-2. But then on that 4-on-2 chance, Cody Ceci manages to get his stick in a passing lane and prevent anything dangerous from coming from it. So it is a very weird choice by Ceci that he then bails out himself in it. So it's definitely the duality of Cody Ceci. He is capable of playing strong defensive hockey, at least for like a San Jose Sharks defenseman, which is not like a super high bar to clear, but it is strange that he continues to have these weird brain fart moments in which he's just making really, really bad calls. When it comes to the Sharks' second defensive pairing, we have Ferraro and Liljegren, and we'll actually start off with Mario Ferraro. It must be said that it is going to be very unlikely that we're going to ever have the sort of pristine, picture-perfect game. You know, like Jake Wallman the other night against Pittsburgh, that was an incredible game. We're never really going to get that from Mario Ferraro. There are always going to be some giveaways, like the case here tonight. He had a couple of pretty bad giveaways at times, but from a Mario Ferraro's perspective, this was definitely one of his best games of the season. I have actually mentioned this in the past, so last year, that Mario Ferraro is a very kind of a defenseman who moves very much with the team itself. When the team is playing poorly, Ferraro is usually going to play very poorly on top of that, but when the team plays well, Ferraro will follow suit on top of that too. And so that is exactly the case here tonight. The Sharks, they put up one of their best efforts of the season, a full 60 minutes like I talked about, and Ferraro puts up one of his best efforts of the season as well because of it. Again, there are mistakes, you're not going to eliminate that, but it's about as good as you can expect from him. When it comes to his defensive partner, Timothy Liljegren, I actually thought he started this game off also extremely well. His first period was quite good. He did definitely slow down a little bit, not necessarily in terms of making major defensive mistakes, but I didn't exactly see that same offensive shine as we did see in the first 20 minutes, I felt like, but still a pretty good game for Liljegren. And then we get to the Sharks' third defensive pairing as we have Thrun reunited with Jan Ruda, and I talked about a few games ago, once Thrun was put up with Cody Ceci, that he was seemingly thriving with the extra minutes and the tougher competition compared to when he was playing the third pairing minutes and was just not looking particularly good. And it was kind of this weird situation in which, for whatever reason, Thrun against weaker competition looks worse somehow. And that was indeed the case here tonight. I thought Thrun was the worst defenseman for the Sharks tonight. It was not a good game. I think he got better a bit as it went on. You know, his third period was okay. But the fact is that in the first period, he was struggling in even just the very basic areas of just landing a simple pass, like even D to D, he couldn't manage to pull off on a consistent basis. So not a very good game for Henry Thrun. I wonder if it does correlate to the reason why he gets demoted here. He probably thinks he has been playing rather well, and he has been over these last few games, and is probably not super happy with the fact that he ends up losing his spot to Jake Wallman just because Wallman has that kind of seniority. Again, I don't blame Morsovsky for this decision, but I also don't necessarily blame Thrun if he's feeling a little bit spurned from that, because he ends up getting the least amount of ice time here tonight at just 13 minutes, which he deserved, but near the start of it, there were definitely some major mistakes. When it comes to his defensive partner, Jan Ruda, we also saw Jan Ruda also struggle considerably with now being separated from Wallman. This is likely because Thrun did also struggle here tonight, and so Jan Ruda didn't have the same level of support from a fantastic puck-moving defenseman like he played with Wallman over these last couple of games. And so while Ruda wasn't completely terribly awful like Henry Thrun was at times this game, he definitely wasn't good either. And then we have the Sharks goaltender Mackenzie Blackwood. This is one of those games that on the surface here, his stats are going to take a hit, right? His save percentage, he gives up 4 goals on what the Red Wings had maybe like 25-ish shots this game. That's not going to reflect quite well. But all in all, I thought he played a pretty good game, and he didn't really have a chance on any of these goals. This Larkin one was just terrible defensive coverage here, and that giveaway by Jake Wallman. It's very, very tough save there. The Casper one, again, very, very poor coverage by the Sharks on the penalty kill. And then the other 2 goals were just kind of bad luck. The Rasmussen one is just a weird deflection off of a stick and then off of a skate on top of that. And then the DeBrincat one is a pass across that goes off of the lying down body on the ice of Mario Ferraro to come right back to DeBrincat, and it catches Blackwood going across. Can't really blame him on any of these. He did come up with a few big saves here tonight, and so it's not going to look great statistically, but I still thought he played rather well. And that will do it for this review. The Sharks will be back in action on Wednesday. They'll be taking on the Dallas Stars for the second time this season. The Sharks actually played a pretty good game against the Stars back in the, I think, Game 3 of the year. They went all the way to the shootout. That was the beginning of the Sharks' shootout woes this season as they lost that game 3-2. And so they'll be looking for revenge against, of course, a pretty good Dallas Stars team. Class dismissed.